We're live now.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm Andrew Hennigan and I'm speaking to you now live from Impact Hub Stockholm in the centre of Stockholm, Sweden. Today I'm going to talk to you about how unlikely partnerships can solve difficult challenges. But before we start, just a word about questions and feedback. If you have any questions at any time, or if you have any comments or you want to share your own stories, you're welcome to add them on the Facebook page. At the end of this session, we'll answer any questions that are there already. All the other questions and comments we will look at later and you will get your answers eventually. But for now though, let's get back to the talk and find out how unlikely partnerships solve difficult challenges. Now, in my experience, most people are sure partnerships, alliances and agreements are very useful. But though everybody agrees that they're useful, very often they don't understand exactly how much useful they are. And what's even more interesting, in my opinion, is that they often leave interesting alliances and partnerships on the table. There's a potential agreement, but it doesn't get taken, and it's interesting to look at why. And in fact, the first point now, hold on a second. Yeah, the first question I want to ask then is, why are we cooperating anyway? And to examine this, we're going to try and explain the mystery of the coffee shop. So what is the mystery of the coffee shop? Well, if you go just up the street here, about 100 meters, 200 meters, there's a coffee shop. It belongs to a big chain of coffee shops, which I will not name. Now, just over the street is a sandwich shop. And that sandwich shop also belongs to a big chain, which I will not name today. But since February, there has been a new initiative. They announced a few months ago that they were going to cooperate on a new program where they embed a sandwich shop inside the coffee shop. So what you have is what they call in their press relations a shopping shop, what I call an embedded shop. So if you're in the coffee shop and you're hungry, you don't need to cross the street to go buy a sandwich, you can just eat the sandwich there. Now this actually was rolled out in 5 locations experimentally in March. Not brilliant timing, unfortunately, so it's hard to tell if it's going to be a success or not, but at least they're trying it. And in their press release, I remember they were writing that this cooperation is groundbreaking and innovative. And that is where the mystery is, because what I'm wondering is not, why have they done it? My wonder is, why was this not done before? Because if you think about it, this embedded sandwich shop inside the coffee shop is something they could have done a year ago, 10 years ago, 100 years ago. They could have done it even 2,000 years ago at the times of the ancient Romans. The ancient Romans mostly lived in apartment buildings called insulae, which were very much like the traditional Swedish apartment blocks. And they were not great at home cooking because most people didn't have kitchens. So they used to buy their food and their drink from little bars and cafes on the ground floor of their apartment blocks. They were called popine and thermopyle. Now I'm sure that some Roman guy could have said, why do we have a separate food shop and a separate wine bar? Why don't we cooperate and use the same space? They could have done that 2,000 years ago. So why is it not being done? Good question. There are a lot of potential cooperations which, when you think about it, you could have done at any time, but we're not doing it. Which means that one of the first lessons is to look around you. Maybe there are some potential partnerships out there, even obvious ones, and you are missing them because you're not looking or you're not trying to find partnerships. And then suddenly you discover something which everybody laughs at because they think this is so obvious. Why didn't they think of it before? And some are even a little bit harder to imagine, at least at first, but when somebody explains it, it becomes obvious. And this is a story about the utility meters. Now, if you ask your parents or your grandparents, they will tell you that there was a time when every so often a guy with a flat hat would come to your house, read your electricity meter, write down how much you had consumed, and then they would send you a bill and you'd have to pay for it. Then somewhere around the end of the 1900s, they invented a new kind of meter which counts how much electricity you've used, then it sends the data either back over the power line using radio waves or through a kind of mobile phone, a GSM connection from the box in your apartment back to the power utility company. Now, when these were first being proposed, the meters were expensive. Everybody had a meter already, and the guys were going around reading them. And that had a regular cost in terms of salary and so on. But when you try to sell the electronic meter, then you have a problem, because customers have to think, why do I have to invest all the money changing all these meters to reduce the cost of the reading? But they did the math, and it turned out that it was actually a convincing case. But I talked once to somebody who was selling one of these first meters. And he said he went to an electricity company once, and he said, look, with my self-reading meter, you can fire all your reading people and save a lot of money. And the customer said, you know what, I've got a better idea. Instead of replacing the old meter with the expensive electronic one and saving money on the reading, I could just make a deal with the gas company, the water company, and the heating people. And then what I can do is I can have one guy read all of the meters, and that reduces the cost drastically. So I don't need your expensive meter, thank you. But they weren't doing that. They had that idea in that moment, but they were not doing it. Some utilities actually do that now, but it's no longer necessary, because in the meantime, they have deployed the electronic meters everywhere. It's much more efficient, it's much more effective. It adds also a lot of other features. But there's a twist. If you look at the description of the Actaris meters they're using here in Stockholm at least, there is a little data port. And what's that for? It's so that you can plug in third-party devices like other utilities, so they can share their infrastructure among the others, the distance heating, the water supply, the gas supply, what other utilities you have, you can plug into the electric meter, and then the electric companies can gather that data and then give it to you. So they baked in the cooperation idea into the meters that they've installed now. These meters can actually do a lot more, because they can also upload the firmware over the air, so they can download new software. They can turn your power on and off remotely, and many other things. And I've often wondered if there are any entrepreneurs out there who could think of an interesting application for this connection, because it exists. It's not really being used, but maybe somewhere there is somebody who has a need, and this infrastructure would support that need. So then they can go to the electric company and say, look, we would like to use your utility connection from your meter. And then they'll say, okay, yeah, why not? And we'll make a deal, because there's often a lot of unexpected opportunities for making agreements. But so far, we've been talking about when using an agreement actually gives you a benefit. So we're looking at situations where the sort of baseline is no agreement, everything's okay. But if you have an agreement or a partnership, things are better. But there are also many cases where the baseline is in the middle, and not having a partnership or agreement makes things worse. And my example of that is the sad story of snurfing. Now, I don't know if anybody here has ever been snurfing, but maybe you know it by another name, snowboarding. Now, what happened is that in 1965, somebody called Sherman Popper invented a new sport which he called snurfing, which comes from snow surfing. He launched the product, he sold it to Brunswick, he kept the trademarks, and this new sport started to grow in popularity. Then there was a young Jake Burton Carpenter, came along in the 70s, and he decided he would like to make snowboards too. So he made a board, and he called it a snurfer, or a snurfboard, just like the Poppen original. And he would have carried on making them like that with his Burton brand, but Sherman Poppen didn't like people using his name. So he sent his lawyers to threaten Burton and say, don't use my brand. So he said, okay, in that case then I'll call mine a snowboard. So then he launched a company, Burton Snowboards. Everybody else called their product snowboards too. Then the sport became snowboarding, and now snurfing is forgotten. Nobody calls it snurfing anymore. Nobody has a snurfboard anymore. It's gone. In an interview many years later, Sherman Poppen actually admitted that was a mistake. He said, I should never have done that. Now, if you think about it, if he had made an alliance with Burton and the other producers, then what would have happened was that everybody would have called it snurfing. It would have become the Olympic sport. He would have been recognized as the father of snurfing. He would have been the guest of honor at every annual gala event, and his place would be assured in history. But He didn't do that, so that didn't happen. So now more people have heard of Jake Burton Carpenter than have heard of Sherman Poppen, and this is very unfortunate, but it shows that sometimes not having an alliance actually hurts you. And also, we're sort of foreshadowing what comes later. Having an alliance with your rivals is often a very, very good idea. So that's why you should be cooperating, why you should be looking for alliances. But what about this unlikely partners we talked about? Let's have a look at the first of these. When you're trying to make an alliance, there's a lot of obvious people. Like if you're a snowboard manufacturer, maybe you think I'll make a deal with other snowboard makers, or maybe a chain of retailers, or whatever. But there are also a lot of potential partners who are not so obvious, and these are very often the most interesting. The first of these tales is the sad story of the Tram and the Telegraph, or not sad actually, it's just weird. Now back in Paris in 1880, the electric telegraph had arrived, and telegraph messages were arriving in the centre of Paris, and many of them were for the stock market, just over the street. So the telegraph company had a last mile problem. Their problem was to get all the messages from the telegraph office to the stock market. And they thought the best technology for that was to put a tube under the road, put the messages in containers and just blow them through the pipe. A pneumatic post. But then they realized that actually the pneumatic post is not only good for very short range communication, it's actually better than the telegraph for mid-range messaging as well. For very long messages, long communications, you really need to use telegraph because it's very fast. But if you're just going around the city, a pipe with air blowing through it is actually a lot faster because you just take the message, put it in a container and send it. So very soon the telegraph company opened a whole network of pneumatic post stations, and they became incredibly popular. Everybody in Paris who wanted to send an urgent message would get a little blue piece of paper, they'd write their message on it, they'd take it to the nearest pneumatic post office, hand it in, and it would be put in a container and sent through the pipes and eventually end up at the destination. Except there was a problem. They were saying, okay, if somebody lives next to a pneumatic post office, they can hand in the message. But what if they don't? Then somebody said, oh, well, we will put mailboxes all over Paris and you can put your blue messages into the blue mailbox. Then the question was, how do we empty these mailboxes? And then some lateral thinker said, why don't we ask the boxes to come to us? Which sounds crazy, but they thought, yeah, and we know how to do it. They screwed the wooden mailboxes on the back of the horse trams so that they came down to town. So you would pop your message in the mailbox, which was on a tram. The tram would go down to the terminus. At the terminus, there was a guy waiting to take that and put them into the post system, and then the message would soon be on its way. So this cooperation between the tram network and the telegraph network made it possible to deliver messages very quickly. And this, when you think about it, it's obvious. And I've heard of other systems where they have actually used trams to carry parcels. So it's not something that's completely unheard of, but it means that you sometimes need to be looking around for somebody who maybe has part of the solution that you need. And the pneumatic post and the tram and the collaboration, I think, is a very interesting example of that. But that's Paris, and that's 1880s. Let's come back into the present time and something a little bit closer to home. The interesting case of Impact Hub, which is where I am speaking right now. On 1st of January this year, Impact Hub moved from the old Tullhuset to a new headquarters in the centre of Stockholm. If you look at the front door, there is a big sign there which says Impact Hub, but it also says Verkstan, and there's a little row of logos. And this reflects the fact that now Impact Hub is part of a larger partnership, which is very interesting from many points of view. Now this partnership is basically between three partners. First is Skandia, the real estate company that owns the building. Their own offices are actually upstairs in this building. The second partner is, of course, Impact Hub Stockholm, which is both a co-working space, an incubator, and a place for encouraging socially useful enterprises. And the third partner is a company called the European Furniture Group, which is an office furniture company which makes the EFG and Savo brand chairs, tables, and other things. Now, everybody benefits from this alliance. First of all, Impact Hub gets a nice space downtown, very good location. We also get very, very nice furniture. We get all the best things from Savo and EFG, so we're very comfortable here. But the other partners also benefit a lot. Scandia, the owner, use Impact Hub as a way of observing the office of the future, how spaces are going to evolve, because if you are a real estate company, it's really important for you to understand how people are using their office spaces, how people are working, so that you can develop things for the future. Having a laboratory like Impact Hub in your own building is very, very convenient. You can keep listening to what people are looking for, discuss with them, try out ideas, and so on. For the furniture people, it's a big win-win for them too, because they were looking for a showroom. The problem with having your own showroom, though, is an office equipment showroom is actually quite a cold and not very exciting place. It's also expensive. You have to pay the rent, you have to pay the electricity, you have to heat it, you have to pay somebody to sit there all day in case a customer comes. But by using this space as a showroom, what they have is they have a living showroom. They bring here people to look at things. It's much nicer to see the chairs and the tables and everything else being used by a real people doing real work. And also at the same time, they're able to get useful feedback about which things we like, because obviously here we have a lot of different chairs and tables, and every morning when we arrive, we're all deciding where are we going to sit today. And that choice partly depends on which things we like. And the furniture partner, they see that, so they benefit a lot. So everybody wins through this work-stand collaboration. And it sounds obvious when it's being explained to you, but when you think about it, it's actually very, very useful for everybody, and it saves a lot of wasted money, wasted resources, and it helps Impact Hub to serve its audience better, to serve the community better, by delivering a more comfortable space and by delivering the things that people need. So it's been very, very interesting for all of us so far. The third case is a little bit different. This time it's more about how you manage people. And this is the cooperation between the SAS airline, the Sophia Hemmet Hospital, and the Sophia Hemmet School. Now, what happened 2 months ago is that because of COVID-19, airline flights were mostly grounded, which means that most airplanes were on the ground and there was no need for cabin crew. At the same time, though, there was a growing need for staff in hospitals. So somebody had the brilliant idea, why don't we take cabin crew, give them a very, very high-speed training, and then we put them to work in the hospital. And that's what the corporation did. SAS provided the cabin crew, Sophia Hemmet University College trained them to do the essential things that they would need to do in the hospital, and Sophia Hemmet gave them a job as an assistant in the hospital. So they've been able to, at the same time, to alleviate the crisis caused by the pandemic. Now, this is a very interesting. It's not entirely original. It's quite, well, I wouldn't say common, but it happens in the HR community that sometimes when you need to lay off a lot of people, that the HR will call friends in companies nearby, say, do you have any spaces? Could you take some of my people, please? And they try to get some help so that more people have a job. But there's another parallel which I think is a little bit even more interesting. In the southern province of Småland in Sweden, there is what they call the Gnosho spirit, or Gnosho Andan. It's a kind of philosophy of the entrepreneurs there. For a very long time, there's been a lot of small companies there since the 1800s who have had this very, very strong entrepreneurial spirit and also a very strong drive to cooperate with each other. And they have, in this Gnosho parish, they have this concept of helping each other out. So if I have a small company, and one day I get a big order, I don't have enough people to make the things, I can just call my neighbor down the road and they will send a few people to help me out. And then when my neighbor one day needs some more people, I will send my people down to help them. So they share workers, they share machines, they share materials, they share knowledge, they cooperate. Even though they're all independent companies, they have this very strong spirit of cooperation. So this is a kind of, it's standard practice in some parts of Sweden. I have seen a similar attitude in some parts of Italy too as well. So it's not entirely new, but it does though hint at possible new ways of managing people, having new flexibilities in employment. And this is perhaps something to think about when you're looking for partnerships and you're not sure how to handle people, or possibly new businesses, possibly new ways of managing very flexible workspaces and flexible workloads. It could be that this shifting of people from one thing to another and very fast training, that could become a thing. It could be creating a whole new market for high-speed retraining for people, and also new tools to encourage this kind of mobility. In Småland, it's done by word of mouth. You just call your neighbor and just say, help, I need 3 people to help pull some wire through the wire drawing machine or whatever, and they help you. Nowadays, I think people would probably be expecting an app or something. But it is, though, the SaaS example, though, has given some inspiration and given some ideas which could inspire people in doing new things with people, because alliances and cooperation are not just about manufacturing or sales or other things. But now we come though to the third section, which is about the alliances with your adversaries, with your rivals, because very often the adversary can be your best partner. We tend to avoid contact with enemies, rivals, adversaries, but very often though they are the people who can be the most help to you. Let's look at the first example, obviously, is the International Space Station. The International Space Station was first launched in 1998 and has been occupied with people continuously for 20 years. It has cost about $200 billion. No one nation could ever afford that. But if you look at what was happening before, there was NASA on the one hand, and there was their rival, the Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, and they were not very good at cooperating. But then for the International Space Station, they decided to cooperate very intensively, which would mean working together on the space station, American astronauts learning Russian and training in the ex-Soviet Union, and they've been working together effectively for a very long time. Now this has been the only way really of building such an expensive project. Without partnership, you could never have had an International Space Station. I don't think anybody could have afforded it. It was already difficult to pay for the part that the Americans had to pay for, that the Russians had to pay for, that the Japanese, the Canadians, the Europeans. If one country tried to do it on their own, they would never succeed. But this is also a little bit an interesting example of what they call science diplomacy. Now, when I first heard about science diplomacy, I was thinking that, this means using diplomacy to make better science. But in fact, it's the opposite way around. Science diplomacy really means using the science as a method for doing more diplomacy. So maybe let's assume for one moment that there is the hypothetical country of North Papaya, and you don't have any relations with them at all. You really don't get on with them. Now, if you try to open an embassy or try to open trade talks, they probably just push you away. But if you go along and say, look, why don't we cooperate in physics? Then they'll say, okay, let's do that. So their physicists talk to your physicists. They talk the same language, math, so it's no problem. They get on very well and it's a non-controversial thing. But in organizing that, though, you have to organize trips, you have to organize visas, you have to organize permits and things. So that means there has to be dialogue. And while you have that dialogue, you start saying, can we also talk about this? Can we talk about that? And it's like getting a little crack in the door so you can get some diplomacy going. The space station also was very, very effective in reducing tensions between the United States and Russia because they were cooperating on that. And in organizing that cooperation, they had to do a lot of other cooperation as well. So this is actually another reason why often having a cooperation with a rival can actually be more beneficial than you think, because it opens the door to other things. So maybe you cooperate in a very narrow area, but then that expands later, and that explains also why companies sometimes embed people inside another organization. And the good reason for that is that it encourages communication. It makes it much better for the companies to work together if they have their own person within your building. It encourages everything to work much more effectively, and it's one strategy to try. Another more recent example is the cooperation between Apple and Google. Now this is very, very much an agreement between enemies here, because Apple and Google are in the smartphone business total rivals. You have Apple with its iOS and the iPhone, you have Google with the Android and its own phones too as well. They don't use usually cooperate. And in fact, the press release announcing this cooperation did stress that it was very unusual, and it is. So what they did was they announced that they are going to cooperate in finding solutions for the COVID-19 pandemic. The first phase is they're going to make, first of all, they have agreed some standards for contact tracing apps. The first step is to make APIs that you can use in your apps. If you make a contact tracing app, you can then connect that to the APIs at Apple and Google. And in the second phase, they're going to actually build it into the underlying platform. So the support for contact tracing apps for people who opt into this will be built in to Android and iOS from the ground up, so that in the future it will be very easy for companies or countries to deploy contact tracing tools which use Bluetooth to figure out who you've been close to. So if one day suddenly I'm taken to the hospital and they discover that I have COVID-19, what they can do is they can look at the data from my phone, and thanks to the Bluetooth they can find out who I was close to, and then they can reach out to those people and give them treatment too as well. It has to be voluntary because of the obvious privacy implications, but it's the system which has been very effective in a lot of countries in Asia where they have been very successful in fighting the pandemic. They have used tools like this. And this very unusual cooperation between Apple and Google has been extremely important for making it possible to build these contact tracing apps. And it's very unusual that they do this kind of thing. The third example is even more unexpected. Big Tobacco is also working on vaccines for the COVID-19 pandemic. Now the first reaction is, but wait a minute, aren't Big Tobacco the people who are causing the problem in the first place? Isn't their business model to give everybody lung disease? Why are they getting involved in vaccines? And this does sound very, very strange from the outside. But what's actually happening is that there are at least 2 programs, maybe more. Philip Morris, through one company in Canada that they own, is developing a plant-based vaccine for COVID-19, and British American Tobacco, through the Kentucky Bioprocessing Company in the US, they're developing another. Now this sounds like this is really weird. Why is Big Tobacco suddenly getting into curing diseases? But it's not actually that sudden. British American Tobacco also made vaccines for other diseases like Ebola in the past. It's not a new business for them. And if you know the history of viruses, you will probably also recognize that actually Big Tobacco is the pioneer in this field, because the very first virus ever discovered was the tobacco mosaic virus in 1895. Back in the 1800s, the tobacco industry was plagued by terrible problems of diseases that wiped out the tobacco plants. Now, tobacco plants are very valuable, so they put a lot of money into researching this problem, and especially the problem of the tobacco mosaic virus, because that seemed to be resistant to all of the technology they had at the time. They tried to identify the bacteria that was causing it, and they found that there was nothing there. They filtered out all of the bacteria, but the disease was still there. That's when they realized there must be something else. They studied that, then they discovered the whole mechanism of the virus and how it works. So it all started, and so Big Tobacco has, for the last 125 years, been working in this field, and that's why they suddenly come out now and introduce their ideas for vaccines. But it's not actually so sudden. But there's an important lesson here as well, because it's tempting to turn to companies who you think solve your problem. We've seen this with certain governments who have, instead of going to companies with know-how to make ventilators or vaccines, they're going to companies like, they go to a big fashion house to get protective equipment, or they go to a vacuum cleaner maker to get a ventilator, instead of going to companies that actually know how to make these things. And that's probably because they don't know. And it's not always obvious, just like you would not normally realize that Big Tobacco actually knows a lot about vaccines, but you would probably not know where to go to really to get the best protective equipment, to get the best vaccines, to get the best ventilators and other medical equipment. It's not always where you expect it to be. So being able to keep an open mind, look out for people who might be doing interesting things, even if they are on what you think is the other team, because it's not like football, it's not like basketball. There is no division between teams. Big tobacco, in some ways, you might perceive as being on the other side because they make cigarettes, and cigarettes give you a cough, and the cough makes you ill. But on the other side, though, they are also making vaccines. So somebody who you maybe are writing off as an enemy or a rival, just like the case of Sherman Poppen and the snowboard, he was dismissing people as being rivals and competitors when in fact they were potentially very, very valuable partners. And he missed that. And there's a danger too, again, that maybe you're looking around for who to partner with and you choose all the wrong people because you're not digging deep enough. So it's very important to look out for who are the real potential partners. Don't neglect the rivals, the enemies, because that's very important. And that brings us then to the part about what you do now. We've looked at a few examples, we've looked at a few cases. You've seen how, first of all, it's very important to have alliances and partnerships. We've seen also that it's not just a luxury. It's not that with partnerships things are better and without them they're just okay. It's that actually by not having a partner you can actually damage yourself. You can damage your business and you can do a Sherman Pop and you can end up like the Snurf board, forgotten and abandoned because you didn't manage your alliances properly. So the question now then is how do you move forward to build these alliances? And there are basically 3 essential steps I think you should be doing. The first is you need to broaden your connections. This is something most people are very, very much not good at. We tend to hang out with people who are like us. In psychology, there is even a name for this. It's called homophily, and it's something that's been observed in societies all over the world. People naturally hang out with people who are most like them, which means that to meet people who are very different, who have different perspective, different background, different knowledge, requires usually a deliberate effort. There used to be occasionally the chance where you'd be sitting next to somebody on an airplane, a random happenstance, but that doesn't actually, well, right now it doesn't happen at all, but it's never been a main source of interesting connections for me. Actually go out and look. One place to look is a place like Impact Hub, where we have a lot of people with very different backgrounds, very different businesses, very different perspectives. That gives you a lot of insights, just talking to the people here. I also deliberately go to events that look boring. I look through the catalogue of events, and once a year, typically, I look and think, what's the most useless event I can find in the calendar? And then I go there. Because very often, it's a lot more interesting than you expect. It's just your perception. You're thinking, what can a conference about this do for me? Then you go there, surprised. So you need to be meeting people who are different, going to events that are different. Don't go to the same event every week. Go also to things like TED, where you get a lot of different talks on different topics. Consume interesting podcasts and things like that. But you need to be meeting people who are not like you. You need to be looking at people who maybe you don't like. The political rival, the business rival, the person who you think, they work for big tobacco, so I don't like them, or whatever. You have to be thinking, who are these people? I want to talk to them, because that having a much broader range of connections will help you to find opportunities, ideas, and so on. The second secret is to study the cases from the past. And that's because things very often come back, and very often there were fundamental developments made a long time ago which we forget about, we take for granted, they turn out to be still useful. Take, for example, the fact that telegraph wires are along the rail tracks. We just kind of take that for granted. You're going along in a train, there used to always be poles with wires on them. Now it's more likely to be fiber optic cables. Why do the cables all along the railway lines? Simple. If you need to pull a cable from Göteborg to Stockholm, the only easy way to get to land is to run it alongside the railroad. Sometimes the highways, but in the 1800s, when most of these lines were first made, there were no highways, so they used the railways instead. But this is still being used, this approach. You'll find, for example, that tunnels carrying trains under cities typically are full of telephone cables, data cables, power cables, for the same reason. Air is cheap and it's safe, so you can easily put all your cables underground where they're not in the way. Another company recently, who was bringing back the old milkman model. For a long time, we've had the linear business where people would maybe make food, deliver it to the supermarket, you would pick it up, throw it in, the trash would go to the landfill. Now people are trying to turn to a more circular model, but this is actually what happened in the middle of the 1900s, where in many countries, before everybody had a refrigerator, somebody called a milkman would come to your house every day and bring fresh milk and related products. But now people are bringing back that concept with a delivery which brings you various branded products, and then the containers are then collected again and sent back for recycling. So they're returning to the old milkman model, just like often today we are returning to the old telegraph wire model. And very often you see an old idea and that inspires you, like the idea of putting mailboxes on trams. One is going to think, wait a minute, I could use that as well. That could be a way of delivering something or collecting something, or for recycling or whatever. You make a partnership with the local transport authority and you're in business. So there's always a lot of opportunities like that. And sometimes just looking at what people did can be very valuable because it reminds you of things you can still do today, or maybe it gives you a similar sort of inspiration. Like maybe you decide that, wait a minute, I have a new idea for a business, I have a new idea for an app, and I can do that by piggybacking on the technology used for the electric meter reading, which means that every house, at least in Sweden, has this data connection, which is always on, and there must be some way of using that. So that is potentially a partner for somebody in future. And then the last of the moving forward points is you have to get good at talking to rivals. This is one thing that people are often not good at. Sometimes just because they don't like their rivals or because they don't trust them. Sometimes it's because they had antitrust training and they're afraid of talking to competitors because they might be breaking the law. Actually, you're not talking about pricing, you're not breaking the law at all. And there's a lot of things you can do. About the beginning of the 2000s, I was part of an initiative called the Open Mobile Alliance, which was a grouping of companies that were put together to standardize phones would interact with each other. Nobody wants a business where an Apple phone can only talk to an Apple phone or an Android phone can only work with an Android phone. So what happened was that all the phone makers, the telephone network operators, the software developers, everybody all got together for a load of meetings in Rome, Los Angeles, Hawaii, and so on, to agree on a load of standards which still exist today, the Open Mobile Alliance standards. And that's what makes all the smartphones compatible. So what would happen is that we would all meet up every few months in some hotel somewhere. All the people who were really rivals, the phone people especially, didn't like each other and they didn't like the operators. And then often there would be people like me in the middle who would be sort of like, people would ask me to help them to explain something to somebody else, and we would have a lot of political things going on in the corridors. It was very interesting, a really useful experience, but it showed me also that to get a successful ecosystem like today's smartphones, you need to get all these rivals together in the same place. You have to agree a lot of stuff. Without that, you're not going anywhere. And this is something that very, very often is not fully understood. There is also a lot of sort of like unofficial back channel communications between adversaries. You see this sometimes in the secret discussions between environmental lobbies and big industries, where sometimes there is a private channel and maybe there is some negotiating going on, but that, for obvious reasons, has to be confidential and nobody talks about that. But there are a lot of discussions, and very often your most successful alliances, your most successful partnerships will come from talking to people who are in maybe the same field but disagree, or maybe you're competitors or whatever. And ignoring them and not communicating with them is actually a very, very serious weakness. So that's the steps that you can take to start to move forward. We can explain now a little bit more concretely now, very briefly, how you can take advantage of our space for that as well. So how would you share your thoughts with us? How do you engage with the people here at the Hub? How do you engage with me as well? And there's several ways of doing this. First of all, what you can do is if you have any questions, you have any examples you want to share, you can post them on the Facebook page. You can do it now if you want, or if you're watching a recorded version of this talk, you can do it then too, or you can do it anytime you like. I don't care. I will come back and check the page from time to time. Now you can post there any questions, I will answer them for you. Or if you have any interesting examples of cooperation, you're welcome to post those too. If you have about where you can find partners, you're welcome to do that too. Or if you are looking for somebody, we'd welcome you to post that too as well, because maybe you are looking for a partner in a certain business, and maybe somebody here can connect you to the right person. Maybe we can arrange the meeting, or maybe your dream partner actually is based here at the Impact Hub, and we can connect you directly. So you can use that now, or in real time, or you can do it offline later, and we will be monitoring this page for as long as it's necessary to make sure that if there's any messages, any inputs, any comments, or anything, you will get an answer. And if you want to discuss also things which are, if you want to also contact me directly, you can also contact me through the various channels. This talk comes with my standard lifetime guarantee, which means that if you have a question tomorrow, next year, whenever, you're welcome to send it to me. The things of public interest, I hope you'll post on the Facebook page, but if you have anything sensitive, you can send it by email or through WhatsApp or through Twitter or somewhere else, and I will try and answer you there as well. And when the pandemic is finished, you're also welcome to drop by and say hello here at the Impact Hub, and most days you'll find me here, and if you want to discuss the alliances and the partnerships, then you're always welcome to come here. So now, with the clock showing 11 seconds left, I think this is the time when, if you have any questions, we'll try to take them. Otherwise, you're welcome to send questions at any time in the future. Shall we take some questions now, if there are any? Okay, at the moment there aren't any, which means that for now then we close the transmission. You're welcome to post as many comments and questions as you want online, and I will deal with those. But otherwise, anyway, thank you all for listening. We hope to see you here one day as well when times are better. Otherwise, you're welcome to follow Impact Hub on Facebook and sign up for all the future events. There normally are a lot of live events here at Impact Hub, but all of them obviously are moved to live streaming for obvious reasons. But if you follow Facebook, you will see the invitations to all of these events, and you'll be able to see what's coming up. And by the way, if you have any ideas for topics for future events, you're welcome also to send them, because we're always looking for new ideas. And if there's something you really would like me to talk about, just let me know, and maybe we'll talk about it sometime in the future. Okay, and that I think is all for today. So thank you all for listening, and I hope it's been useful, and see you at the next Impact Hub event.